Hi everyone in English 2323, it's Dr. E and I'm here providing you with what I hope is a supplemental / instructional video for this week. We'll see if I can get through everything in a single video. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about James Joyce and his short story Arabi, and then kind of get into what is on the agenda for this week. So I'll start with a discussion of Joyce. I did do a PowerPoint that's really basic, right? So this is Joyce, right? And so what is important to know about him is that he's considered a pretty important and influential author of the 20th century and has had an impact on many authors who came after him because he played with ideas of stream of consciousness and a style of writing that came to be known as modernism. So he played with style. He played with the way he wrote in a manner that other authors necessarily hadn't done before. He was part of a group of authors at this time who were experimental in some ways, which means that people kind of either love or hate Joyce because he can be difficult, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about some of his texts, but hopefully Arabi was not one of those difficult texts for you to read. It's a pretty straightforward short story, but there's a lot packed into a little bit there. So when we think about Arabi, we need to know that it was part of a collection of short stories known as Dubliners. It was published in 1914, and it really addressed what life in the city was like, mostly for the middle class. And so what is kind of interesting about Joyce in general is that he, of course, he's an Irish author. He was born in Ireland, but he didn't necessarily live there. For quite a bit of his life, he didn't live in Ireland, but he always came back to Ireland in general as a subject or content for his texts, whether they were short stories or books. And it was often kind of like a nitty-gritty view of at least the city of Dublin, right? But it wasn't supposed to be kind of a negative view. He wrote in a way that just showed his deep-rootedness in Irish kind of life. And that's something we haven't necessarily seen from our other authors thus far, right? Ireland hasn't really been the home space for some of the authors that we've read, which is not to say there weren't other Irish authors, right? We just have not touched upon some of them. Okay, so Joyce was, he straddled the shift over into the 20th century, right? So he was born in the 19th century and died, at a pretty hectic time of the 20th century because of the wars and whatnot. He was born in Ireland. He wrote about Ireland, but he didn't really live there for a long time. He is pretty well known for his texts titled Ulysses and then additionally Finnegan's Wake. Also a book that's called Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. But I thought that these were two pretty important examples. These are a lot of times texts that people know Joyce by these texts, but people haven't necessarily read them. They are really dense, complicated texts to read. If you want to do a little bit of experimental reading, you can find both online. You can access them through various websites just to kind of, get a sense of not only what it's like to read his writing in this way, but also like how did he write these things? It's pretty incredible. So again, he's known for stream of consciousness writing, which is very much a part of this time that he really developed this method of, we think in stream of consciousness, and sometimes we write in stream of consciousness. If we are just kind of, say we're journaling and just writing every thought that comes into our mind, it kind of bounces all over the place, right? It's how we think, so I'm sitting here talking about stream of consciousness to you, but I'm also in the back of my mind kind of thinking about Joyce. I'm thinking about, Arabi. I'm thinking about, did I make sure to post this one thing on D2L? My mind is going in a lot of different directions, but a lot of times when authors write, they try to narrow the focus, right? It can be a little chaotic to read a stream of consciousness kind of writing because it seems like things are just moving in all these different directions. So a lot of people appreciate that writing because it is experimental, but people, during the time that Joyce is working to publish, some of these things weren't weren't necessarily big fans. So he also did face some censorship, not necessarily with Finnegan's Wake, but with Ulysses for some of its content. I wanted to provide an example from Ulysses just to kind of give you a sense of what kind of text it is. This is just from one of the chapters. And so he writes, ineluctable modality of the visible, at least that if no more, thought through my eyes, signatures of all things I am here to read, sea spawn and sea wreck, the nearing tide, that rusty boot, snot green, blue silver, rust, colored signs, limits of the diaphany. But he adds, in bodies. Then he was aware of them bodies before of them colored. How? By knocking his sconce against them. Sure, go easy. Sound like fun? Aren't you glad we read Arabi instead of this? But like I said, some people that just really speaks to the way that they read, and they like that it's just kind of something very different. Okay, so this is Ulysses. I did want to show you because I thought it was just unbelievable. This is the Project Gutenberg, which has open access to the text. This is the last chapter. Do you notice that it's one gigantic paragraph for the most part? Yeah, this is still that paragraph. Again, interesting, right? Joyce is just kind of a fascinating writer in general, but an individual for sure. Okay. So this is from Finnegan's Wake, and what I want you to recognize is just that he was being very experimental here, and he was actually inventing kind of language. He has, what clashes here of wills gen once, ostrogods, gaggin fishy gods, brekek, kekek, 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 coax, 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 oolah, oolah. You know, I mean, to a lot of people, they were just going, what is happening here, right? But again, a lot of people took to this. A lot of people liked that this was just something so different and unique. And a lot of people, a lot of authors after him just took a page from his book in terms of ideas. So you have Anthony Burgess, who is the author of A Clockwork Orange. If you ever want to read something that's kind of mind-bending and works with invented language in some ways, give that one a try. But a lot of authors came after him that kind of played with this style. It's not for everyone though. So when we get to Arabi, which, you know, is more of a straightforward kind of short story, it is narrated by a young boy in Dublin. But what's really kind of important and what Arabi is recognized for is this idea of epiphany, right? This notion, you know, we've all had those moments of epiphany where we just kind of like, we have this realization of something. And a lot of times it feels good to have these moments of epiphany. But for our young narrator in this short story, it's kind of a bummer. He gets to this, what's called a bazaar or fair, and he's really disappointed. He's expecting to see these goods and these people from different places in the world to be exposed to this kind of, you know, exotic place. And it's just kind of blah. It's just kind of, he sees teacups and things that are very British or Irish. You know, he's just not impressed. And it's all coming at the end of kind of his trials and tribulations trying to get to this space, because he's promised his friend's sister that he'll go and he'll buy something, but it just is such a disappointment. And so that's one of the themes for sure. You know, young love, he's kind of, I wouldn't say love, this is kind of an accepted theme, but when it comes to this short story, he's kind of a stalker. I mean, but he's a young boy, right? So he becomes a little bit obsessed with Mengen's sister. So he's watching her, you know, from his window, he's hiding. So it's just, you know, he's kind of obsessed with her. He's dreaming about places unknown. There's that exoticism for Arabi, the bazaar. But then it's also those mundane aspects of life become such a huge disappointment, because he's waiting on his uncle. He has to do all this stuff. His uncle doesn't care about what he wants to do. He's trying to get the train. He gets there right before it closes, because all of these things happen that are so mundane. You know, you're waiting on your uncle and your uncle's late and the train is, you know, but it ends with disappointment, which is a very Joyce way to end a story. So I hope you got kind of a kick out of reading this, just because Joyce's writing, even though it's not kind of as crazy as Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses, is still, he's descriptive in ways that are kind of new to what we've been reading so far, and he is providing a setting that is also new because we haven't had necessarily a view of Dublin as a city. We've had London, right? But not necessarily Dublin. Okay, so I want to switch gears now and see if I can fit in a discussion of what to expect for this week's assignments. So if we go to D2L, we're in week 13. Your goal this week is going to be to revise and resubmit your paper portfolio. That's going to be based on the feedback that you get from me. I'm still working on some of that, so if you don't see your feedback by Monday evening, let me know, but that's when I should have everybody's done. I'm just working through several classes and trying to get those. So I expect fully that you look at my feedback and let me know if you have any questions, because when it comes to grading your portfolios, I have a large enough computer screen. Thankfully, I'm lucky enough to be able to put your draft on the page and then your final. And I'm going to look and see if you've updated those things that I've mentioned, if you've corrected those errors. So the grading will be more intense because of this. We've gone through, you know, the original time you wrote the post, you revised and had peer review, you revised and submitted to me and got feedback. This has gone through several kinds of rounds of revision, so my expectations are pretty high. So do the best you can to earn the best grade possible, okay? So that's going to be due on Sunday. It was originally going to be Friday, but I thought now, you know, especially because I'm a little behind with providing feedback, both the multimedia project plan and the portfolio will be due Sunday at the same time, so plan ahead. But you do have a reading post that's due on Thursday per usual, and that'll be for Salman Rushdie's The Prophet's Hair, which is a really interesting short story, and he's a really interesting character himself. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about this week and then think about next week. So you have a reading post, which is based on Rushdie, and you're going to choose one of these 3 prompts, okay? Make sure you're answering them as completely as possible. And I put here, show what you know and show that you have read, okay? Your final portfolio is going to be due here in the assignments area. I have a link here if you would like to maybe reach out to have a tutoring session online. And then there's the multimedia project plan, and that is due. And y'all, I just want you to see this as an opportunity to start planning your ideas and settle on an idea so that you're not kind of bouncing back and forth. And so you think about the time it takes to complete this assignment. So this is the this is the PDF version, which you can use and submit, and it just asks you to kind of, you know, think about what's your text, what are themes, or what are you doing with your project and why. I want you to describe your project. Are you doing a PowerPoint? Are you doing a story? What are you thinking about doing? Because the sky's the limit, right? I really want you to think about how you're going to show effort, and that means some of you may have kind of this final product in mind. You have like a painting, but how are you going to show the effort in that? Are you going to take pictures of as you go through the process, right? If you're writing a poem, are you going to show revisions? And that's where PowerPoint becomes kind of useful because it gives you the opportunity to insert those images and show your progression. For something like a video, it's going to take time in editing, and that will be clear. But it's really, if you just have one final item, we want to see the work you put into it and the process. If you're baking something related to one of our stories, show the steps, right? So remember to look at the examples and information from the instructional video. Please take some time to draft out your paragraphs. This is where people lose a lot of credit, is these paragraphs where, you know, you're, especially the one where you're citing a text. So I'm giving you the space to try to work on a draft so that you've gotten it started. It doesn't overwhelm you when everything is due, okay? If you have any questions about that, just let me know. I am going to, let me pull up D2L. So multimedia project plan and portfolio due at the same time in the assignments area, as well as your reading post. I am going to, though, and I will post an announcement about this, I'm going to open a conversation or a time for us to meet via WebEx just for a Q&A session. So if you have some questions or concerns about, you know, your idea for the multimedia project, you can meet during this time, or last minute questions about your portfolio. But know that it will be an open conversation to not only our class, but to my English 1301 classes as well. So don't share anything private. If you can't meet with me then send me an email so we can plan a time to meet outside of that. All right, good luck this week, y'all.